Hi, and welcome to Rogers TV. April 28th is the National Day of Mourning dedicated to remembering those who have lost their lives or suffered injury or illness on the job or due to a work-related tragedy. It's an annual remembrance. It's a time when people can stop and pause and say, yeah, it matters that we can go home to our kids and our family. And really, we all have to be safe and protect each other. I want to welcome Chris Stephen and Dave Trumble of the Grey Bruce Labour Council. And we're going to be talking about the National Day of Mourning and the kind of things where it came from. Maybe a little few of them. We can even talk about some of the numbers over the years, because I think you'll be surprised. And also we'll talk about some of the events that are going to be planned for this 2022 Day of Mourning. Chris, Dave, welcome. Good to have you back again and to talk a little bit more about this very, very important day of remembrance.
Certainly a pleasure to be here, Dave. Thanks for having us.
Happy to be here.
Now, let's talk a bit about where it came from. This is obviously, we've talked about the Day of Mourning before here on Rogers, but let's go back to the very beginning. Chris, where did it really start?
So I looked this up this morning because I'm a proud QP member, and this actually started with QP members. And forgive me for reading this, but I want to get this story right because it's so vitally important that people understand exactly where this came from. So Workers' Memorial Day was started when two labor activists, Colin Lambert and Ray Sentes, were driving in early April 1983 to a union meeting, and they were stopped by a funeral procession for a fighter who had been killed in the line of duty. They worried that other workers who had died because of work did not receive similar honors, and recalled how members of the United Steelworkers in Elliott Lake held each year a Workers' Remembrance Day for uranium miners that had succumbed to exposures. Lambert and Sentes sought the endorsements from union officials for the idea to hold a National Day of Mourning, and the Canadian Union of Public Employees, CUPE, passed a resolution that in that effect in its annual convention in 1983. And the Canadian Labour Congress followed suit, and at its annual convention the following year, the AFL-CIO declared the Day of Mourning in 1989, and the Workers' Memorial Day is now observed from that movement in over 100 countries, which is fantastic.
And I think it's also worthwhile pointing out that on the 28th of April, the flag at the top of the Peace Tower flies at half-mast, and it is formally recognized by an act of Parliament. So this is something that is acknowledged in so many different ways, not just among those who remember their sisters and brothers who they have lost or been injured. It's something that we are all called to do.
And it's good you mentioned the flags. We have several communities that the Labour Council works with in our catchment area, and they also fly the National Day of Mourning flag. There's a couple of different styles. One is white with black writing and vice versa. But, we've had a lot of real positive interest in making sure that municipalities fly that flag. And there's 5 or half a dozen that have most happily flown that flag. When I say happily, because we're happy they're doing it, but clearly we want to be recognized for the solemnity of the day.
Yeah, and I think that, I recall, I'm old enough to recall the days when firefighters passed away, for example, to go back to your first recognition there, Chris, that when firefighters passed away, it was, it wasn't particularly special. But today, when a firefighter passes away, particularly in the line of duty, it is a very, very somber occasion and a very solemn occasion for remembrance, not just among their brothers and sisters, but also in the whole community where that firefighter may have passed away. And because they often, with deeply regretfully, they often die prematurely because of the working conditions they had to undergo.
And it's very true. One of the reasons that we actually have the Workplace Safety Insurance Board and the Workplace Safety Insurance Act recognizes this sort of lineage back to our volunteer fire brigades. With their their ability to sort of report workplace exposures, and they actually have a document that supports that. And it's all to do with volunteer fire brigades running into a small town tool and die maker, place is on fire, all the chemicals and oils in there are all burning at once, and the chemical soup is undeterminate as to what's in it. And the result was very, very rare illnesses. And at least this way they documented it. Dog ears the page. It doesn't stop them from getting sick, unfortunately, but perhaps there's a route to some compensation or something to at least ensure that their families are looked after.
Yes, I remember a volunteer firefighter chief telling me that one of the things that was expected of them if they suffered smoke inhalation, they were simply told to go and sit on the step of the fire engine and have a smoke.
Yeah, well, sort of not too different than Chris's when he mentioned Elliott Lake earlier on, when the miners were told that the dust in the air was simply nuisance dust, and on the clean side at the head of the mine, they were given nickel dust to inhale to cover to so-called protect their lungs.
Yes, I remember those stories quite well. And working in a uranium mine is not exactly the most healthy place to work because of exposure to low-level radiation and uranium dust and all the other byproducts that are in that as well. So it's not just the mine dust; it's the radioactivity as well.
And that's a perfect segue. We talk about what we want to do so that when we meet for Day of Mourning, we're not talking about staggering statistics. A lot of the most significant steps forward in health and safety, sadly, have come out of the pain and death of workers, but comes right out of those mines. We have a green book, an Occupational Health and Safety Act, because the Elliott Lake miners took it upon themselves in 1974 to do a wildcat strike, which resulted in the Ham Commission report and ultimately the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the laws and the regulations that support it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, mining is not hard rock mining especially has always been a bit unsafe, and I think of coal mining, which I don't think we have any in this province, but certainly when I was in the Maritimes, coal mining was considered a very, very dangerous line of work, but you did it because that was the only job in town.
This is the 30th anniversary, David, of the Westray mine disaster.
Mm-hmm.
So 30 years ago, nearly 30 miners lost their lives. More than half of them remain buried in the mine to this day. But we can be thankful that the work of the steel workers did result in the Westray Law, which is the amendment to the criminal code, where prosecutions can be undertaken for gross negligence causing injury and death. It's not an easy test, of course, and it shouldn't be an easy test. To successfully prosecute under the Criminal Code of Canada should be a tough road to hoe. However, the law exists because of the hard work, and sadly, on the I guess coattails, for lack of a better phrase, of those brave men that lost their lives. Yes,
I remember that the Westray disaster in Pictou County, Nova Scotia. Yes, but the flip side of that are the safety precautions that have come out of many of these accidents, and I think of a friend of mine who actually happened to has just been hired at Hydro One, and he was astonished as a new hire at how much safety training he had to go through and be tested on. I mean, it wasn't just sort of sit there and do nothing. It was, and in one ear and out the other. This was serious stuff, and he was quite both pleased but quite astonished at the amount of safety training that he had to undertake, because, as he said, if you don't do the right thing, you will end up either injured or more likely dead, because electricity is nothing to play around with, nothing.
And that's very true. And I it's important to understand, there are a number of companies that came out of the old Ontario Hydro, and that was where that started, and those companies have continued to adopt and to live up to that value. I'm always, pleased. I mean, a great deal of my work life is at Bruce Power. And if you look at their value statement, what's the first value? It's not profitability. It's not things like that. It's safety, right? And, if you're going to run a business of that nature, whether it be high voltage like Hydro One, whether you're going to work in the nuclear world like Bruce Power, safety better be your first value.
Yes. And Chris, you work for a municipal local, or you work for a municipality that is unionized, and your local is municipal workers. Safety is a very high, have a high importance in your work as well?
Oh, for sure. you've got to make sure when you go in every morning that you understand the risks of the day ahead. We're dealing with heavy equipment sometimes. We cover burials, grass cutting, weed eating, working in arenas with Olympias and Zambonis and ice machines. So it's so important to know all the health and safety procedures and precautions to run these things, to make sure that when you show up at the day, you're going to go home to your family at the end of the day. That is the most important thing. And I'm glad Dave brought up the Green Book. When you see that in your workplace, and it doesn't matter if it's unionized or not, that Green Book has to be in your workplace. If you pick it up and you take a look at it and see all the rules that are in there, every one of those rules is a result of a death, injury, or sickness that has been caused in the workplace. That is why it's there. And unfortunately, those had to happen for those rules to come into effect. But that is the legacy we leave, is trying to make sure that people understand that you need to be safe, follow the rules, and go home to your families.
You know, it's kind of interesting. I met the family of a person who had recently passed away, well into their 90s, nearly 100. And the family was telling me that the person who passed away was probably the oldest WSIB recipient that they had ever heard of. And I think that says a lot about the responsibility of the government and employers to make sure that people are safe to begin with, but also are taken care of afterwards. And although I know that the WSIB can be quite controversial, the point is that it exists for a reason, a very real reason. It's because of industrial accidents and the result, and the making sure that people are rehabilitated or taken care of.
And you know, it's designed, you know, as they call the WSIB, you know, the original Workmen's Compensation Act, they called it the Grand Compromise. You know, the idea being that there would be something to get you from injury back to work, or potentially if you never came back to work, something to ensure some sort of security for your family. But you walked away from the ability to sue the employer, and that was the Grand Compromise. And that is, you know, as you maybe mentioned, David, that is sort of the piece that was kind of lost when the big changes were made to the Workplace Safety Insurance Act back in 1995. You know, previous to 1995, you know, claims and, you know, economic loss awards, et cetera, were far more common, shall we say, because I don't want to give people the wrong impression. You know, it's not just oh, I stick my hand up, I'm hurt, and you get money. That's not how it works. But post 1995 and every year since then, it's become much more difficult for workers to get appropriate compensation.
And let's go back 100 years or more. The original in the railway industry, which was back 150 years ago, a very, very dangerous occupation. If a worker was killed or injured, a jar went up on the counter of the scheduling office, and people put in whatever they could afford, and that was it. And I've heard of sailors on the Great Lakes who were their sole breadwinner. These are back in the 30s and 40s, sole breadwinner for the family, and they were killed. They died, and the family within a month lost their home, lost everything. So it's these people that we remember, but it's also the working conditions that we need to work for and continue to be mindful of as we move forward into the 21st century.
I was just going to say, before you leave that, Dave, you might be interested to know that this is actually the 60th anniversary of the first fatality involved in the construction of the Bruce site. Yeah, the Zotout family. Sjord Zotout was the man who lost his life in 1962. His family, much like Chris's story about the individuals going past the work to memorialize the firemen, his family and his wife at the time, who was still living, saw one of our Labor Council letters to the editor on Day of Mourning and the mention of the Bruce Power, or then OPG, I believe, Day of Mourning ceremony on the site, and wanted to come. And ever since that day, they have been, when we've been able to do in person, which of course COVID has sort of stuck its nasty hockey stick in our skates for the last couple of years on that one, and again this year, but when we were in person, the children, the grandchildren, and Sjord's wife came for as long as she could. Unfortunately, she passed away a few years ago, but the family is still actively, looking to when we're back in person to continue to come to those memorials and honor the loss of their father, grandfather, etc.
I think we forget that the impact on the family and the impact on but especially the historical impact down through the generations. It's good that the person who was the first victim of the first accident at I guess it was Douglas Point back then, is remembered and named and can be named every year because so that in a way that says his death was not in vain because we still remember him.
Absolutely, and there's a few other names on the memorial rock that are read each year, and regardless of whether we're in person or not. And again, this year we can't be in person for all the reasons we know only too well by now. But I know that all kinds of companies and unions and that are doing a really good job of virtual Day of Mourning ceremonies, and the Labor Council and Bruce Power are working together to do another really good one that can be done virtually, and hopefully in another year we'll be back in person.
Sure, but let's kind of move this forward into the COVID era, because the last 2 years have really shone the light on working conditions in long-term care, in hospitals, in healthcare overall, but also on education. So let's look at the impact on long-term care and healthcare. It's had a huge impact. We've seen burnout. We've seen working conditions that are very, very challenging. Is there an intent to include that particular group of people this year as a special call-out?
Well, they're all, since the beginning of COVID, they've been a special call-out on our Day of Mourning. We always make sure we mention them and how hard they've worked and the stress that they've gone through. This has been maybe the most trying event in our history up until now. Now we've got more trying events, like we needed more, but it's been so trying. And what has come to the forefront of health and safety even more in the last couple of years, we were already starting to develop that, is the mental health aspect and wellness aspect of our workers. Like you said, burnout, there's fatigue, but all the PTSD. When you talk about healthcare workers, they're caring for people that are dying. They're seeing that. The mental stress on that is extra to the health, and it just makes them deteriorate. It's the same in education. Education workers they don't just care about themselves, they care about their kids. They develop bonds with their kids. They're looking to take care of their kids. They don't want to see them get sick or anything on their watch. And they're getting confusing messages and have gotten so many confusing messages on what is the best way to do that. And this is where mental health and wellness needs to come to the forefront. It has started to. I just recently took the parts 1 and 2 of health and safety, so I'm now a fully certified health and safety member. And mental health is something we need to really focus on for all workers, not just education and healthcare. They've bore the brunt, but let's think about ambulance drivers and what they've seen. Police officers and what they've seen, fire, the extra precautions they've had to take, and it's just been so trying. And then you go to regular workplaces, your grocery stores and stuff, where they've been yelled at and belittled. It's so important that we start to put mental health and wellness at the forefront of health and safety, and we need to remember them on this day too, because they've all suffered.
It's interesting you mentioned that, Chris. I think you're onto something when you talk about the abuse that people have had to take, and I don't know. We are all a little crispy, aren't we?
I would say that. I would say a little crispy is an understatement. But here's going to be my personal little plea to everybody. I don't care what your political affiliations or your beliefs are. I don't care. It's time that we get back to, not even in this country, globally. It's time that we get back to taking care of one another. Things that we say to each other that are harmful, things that we do to each other that are harmful. We need to come back together as a society. We're coming into the recovery phase. It's going to be so important that you maybe go over to your neighbor that's had a bad day at work and say, hey, You want to have a beer together. You want to have something together and just sit down and talk and spend some time. We need to start caring for one another again instead of having these divisions.
Mm-hmm.
That, you know what, I'm the same. I mean, I see it because, like I say, one of the affiliations that I still maintain is my affiliation with the National Safety Council Labor Division in the U.S. And, you know, they, much like what we're talking about right here, and I imagine it's only an indicator of where it's gone around the world, is highlighting exactly what Chris has said. It's time for people maybe to, you know, stick their hand out instead of stick their hand up. And you know, there is a time for us to sort of heal. I mean, it won't come tomorrow, but there is a time for us to heal. But I just want to, without sort of belaboring the point, it's important too, with the undercurrents of what COVID will leave us with, is we've also invited people to work remotely now for over 2 years. And although I don't see this necessarily in the same arc as PTSD and other mental health and psychosocial issues, but there's going to be another pandemic, and it's going to be ergonomic injuries. We just know that people have not gone home and done what they really should do, or their employer has not been obliging to give them a workspace at home which protects them from ergonomic injuries and musculoskeletal disease. And this is going to be a wave. And we already know that they are the largest burden on, not the people, the cost on the workplace safety insurance situation. And it's going to only increase.
You know, it's funny you should mention that, Dave. I think you're very much onto something. Probably, I'm going to say 20, 25 years ago, a rehabilitation professional that I happen to know was telling me that they had seen a lot more carpal tunnel issues, which is the tendons in the wrist and in the hand. And the only thing that they could figure out why it was computer mouses, computer mice. And they went on searching for a particular, you know, what's the best kind of hand device to use on a computer. But I think that's true of things like chairs, things like office space, and it does matter. It really does matter. Even the fact that it has an effect on your eyes, because if you're staring at a computer screen, a computer monitor, even if it's big, it does strain your eyes. I'm sure our optometrists are going to be kept well in business for the next generation or two because of the difference in eye injuries.
Well, I think of Chris just mentioning that he just been through his health and safety committee certification training. I deliver that training from time to time. And one of the things that I do when I'm delivering it virtually, I always say, okay, I've been talking at you for 45 minutes now. Anybody that's had to listen to my voice for 45 minutes straight needs a break.
How true, how true. Well, let's bring this all full circle and just let's talk about what are the events that are planned for the Day of Mourning here in Grey Bruce.
Chris?
For us right now, because we're just coming out, we haven't really planned anything much live. We will have our communities that fly our flags. I'm going to approach my local, and maybe we're going to have a little day of remembrance as we put our flag up in Erin Elderslie. We'll do something, a gathering, and just say, you know, like, make sure everybody's aware of the day and why and maybe have a little bit of a pause. I encourage all workplaces, if you can work together with your management, to just have a pause at 11 o'clock and just remember or think about, you know, that there are people. I just went over the statistics this morning. We are not doing better. We're actually doing worse for health and safety in Ontario. We're increasing time off related injuries and we're not decreasing them. So we got to do better. That's as simple as that. We got to be more aware. We got to have our safety talks. We got to have tailgate meetings, whatever it takes to get those numbers to go back down and take care of each other.
Sorry, Dave, I didn't want to cut you off, but I do want to mention that on April 25th, it's not the actual Day of Mourning. And in the house today, Chris is sitting in the house. He is actually one of our award winners, the Labor Council Awards on an annual basis, a labor activist and a health and safety activist. And as I'm looking at Chris's face on my screen, you have the Activist Award winner sitting right there, the Labor Activist Award winner. And what we're going to do on April 25th in our community is going to be an executive vice president of the Canadian Labor Congress. And because we know that some of the more, shall we say, top echelon of the union movement will perhaps be in more populous areas on April 28th, we are going to do a local Day of Mourning ceremony on April 25th with good brother Larry Rousseau in our community.
You know, that you make a good point, that it doesn't have to be the 28th of April. It can be another day around that time period. But the important thing is to stop and pause and remember. And, you know, it doesn't take much to have a moment of silence. And especially if in your workplace, you've lost someone in the last year, 2, 3, name them. Just and pronounce their name, speak their name, because that's half the battle. Because right there, you are remembering them, and that's really what matters. Yes, and we should be watching for the municipal flag flying, shouldn't we? It's as we tape this, it's a little early to know exactly which ones, but many municipalities will fly the Day of Mourning flag as well. It's a very interesting and I think worthwhile time for all of us to remember. And I'm sure, David, Bruce Power, there are regular remembrances there too.
Yeah, there's going to be an excellent virtual presentation this year. Like I say, we can't do it in person again, but we're very, very pleased. I mean, the Labor Council is invited to actually have a physical presence on their safety meeting video, as well as, of course, you know, the CEO. And we will also get mention of our scholarship, our Day of Mourning Award person. There will be one that will be normally in person times would be presenting at Bruce Power. We're going to have them mentioned in the site newspaper as well. So there'll be a very high profile for Day of Mourning at the Bruce site. And we're always grateful through the Labor Council to be able to partner with Bruce Power on that front. Sure.
It's something that, as I say, is something that we want to continue and remember, because that's one way that we can all stay safe ourselves.
Go ahead. Sorry, David, I was just going to say, I'd also like to implore any other employer, municipality, or anybody that wants to get involved in Day of Mourning, have something at their work site, fly a flag, anything, reach out to us with the Grey Bruce Labor Council. We're willing to work with you and help you get that done.
Well, I want to thank the both of you for this time today as we talk about the Day of Mourning. And Chris, Dave of the Grey Bruce Labor Council, always good to talk to you, and I'm quite sure we'll talk again.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, friends,
for being
a part of this special Rogers TV Day of Mourning Remembrance. I'm David Shearman. We'll see you.
The Rogers TV viewer response line. Email us or connect with us on social media.
Hi, I'm Sharon Skelly, host of Community Close-Up on Rogers TV. Join me as I interview guests from groups such as healthcare, social services, the arts, sports and recreation, and education. These people make Owen Sound an area the great place that it is to live, work, and play. So remember to join us here on Rogers TV, Grey County. And remember, it's your community, so take part.
Calling all journalism students, Omni Television is once again awarding scholarships to qualified students pursuing a career in third language journalism.
Canada is a multicultural country, and I know that there are a lot of people like me out there. We need a support to do our job.